So speaking of this idea of the importance of the Constitution, why it's so fundamental, now let's start to talk a little bit about government. We take the Constitution, those principles, and how does it apply into this thing we call government? So we got to start where it all started, right? The foundational document of our country is the Declaration of Independence. We're all familiar with the words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? That kind of rolls off our tongue. We know that. That's who we are. That's what we know. It's interesting. We're familiar with those words, but the very next phrase says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. And that's critical. We don't hear a lot about that one, but it's very critical. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. And that answers for us the purpose of government. So what's the purpose of government? It's to secure our rights. Okay, and I always like to point out these two P words. I think they're interesting. One is to protect, and one is to provide. Government's role is to do what? To protect, to secure our rights, not to provide. So at a 10,000-foot view level, if you want to just look in real general terms and a big picture term, if what government is doing is providential or charitable or benevolent or kind or good, that's not the standard. What they should be doing is what is there to protect us. That's their job, is to protect our rights. And that's why they exist. That's what our Declaration says. That's the whole point of government, is to protect our rights. Okay? Which is kind of interesting. Now notice also the central role of God in this Declaration. Okay? He's our Creator. He's endowed us with inalienable rights. He's central, isn't he? So let's compare this founding document that we have in our country with some other ideas. The UN. It's another governmental body out there. Okay? Now you look at these self-evident truths, mankind are created equal, etc., etc. Do you find those in the UN? What do you think? They're not there, are they? They're not there. Okay? They say, no, those aren't there. We'll tell you. And every once in a while the UN's pretty clear, pretty honest with what their intentions are. Here's what they have to say in Article 29, Clause 3 of their UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is interesting. The rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So our Declaration of Independence says that our rights come from God. The United Nations Declaration of Rights says the rights come from them. In other words, they're God. They'll be glad to tell you when you can and when you can't exercise rights, because after all, we gave them to you, so we're in charge of them. Kind of interesting. It's sad. It's not interesting. It's a sad commentary on this general big body of government that we all kind of look at and say, well, yeah, they're just there to help with world peace and things like that. Well, actually, when you look at what they say about what their intentions are, they're diametrically opposed. Okay? You have two different systems of government. I call them diametrically opposed, but I also like to point out that they're diabolically opposed. One honors God and man, and one says, oh, God doesn't exist, and we tell men what they will and will not do. They're diabolically opposed, not just diametrically opposed. And they're not just two different ideas. One honors freedom, and one destroys it. Okay? Kind of interesting. So, what is government then? As we move in, what's this general thing we call government? Frederick Bastiat, he's a great philosopher. He wrote a book called The Law. And in The Law, he's a Frenchman as well. He wrote this in 1851, right in there. He said, life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property exist beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place. So when the founders got together and had this blank slate and said, oh man, we get a chance to start and do this right. What should we do? Someone didn't raise their hand and say, oh, I think we should give men life. Oh, I think we should give them liberty. Oh, I think we should give them property. No, those things already coexisted. We know in the Declaration, those are coexistent, unalienable rights that came with us when we were born. And it's the fact that those existed. That's why men united together and made government, was to protect those things. Okay, so that's what government is. It's coming together to find people that can make laws and get us to be free. George Washington, he says this, I love this quote, government is not reason, it is not eloquence, government is force. Like fire, it's a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Government is force. That's what it is. When you get pulled over, the cop doesn't read you a poem or philosophize with you. He says, look, here's what you did wrong. Here's your ticket. You will pay it. If you choose not to pay it, we will throw you in jail. We're going to exercise force on you. Okay? Now he compares it to fire. So is fire inherently a bad thing? Any of you here used fire before? Yeah, we use it all the time. It's not a bad thing. But can it get out of control really quick? It can. So it's a great analogy. Say government is just like fire. You better watch it. Okay? And there's no question, it's good that government has force. How else are they going to protect our rights if they have no force, no power to do so? Quite simple. So if we're going to do kind of a elementary math equation, we're essentially going to say government equals what? Government equals power. That's what government is. Force, power. That is, at a very basic level, what government is and why it exists. Okay? And so you can see why, if you're not willing to use force and power to do something, then government shouldn't be doing that. If it offends your conscience to do something that would require force, then you better not have government be doing that. Otherwise, you're in the wrong realm. You're not doing what government's proper role is. Okay? Now, Madison says this, kind of summing up what we just said. The essence of government is power, and power lodged that must be in human hands will ever be liable to abuse. Is that true? You bet, because it's in human hands. And it's not like we have perfect men or women who don't want, I don't want power, I just want what's good for everyone. Well, the reality is we are who we are, and it's liable to abuse. So how do you manage that abuse? How do you stop that propensity, or at least keep it in check? The liability the propensity to abuse power. Jefferson answers it this way. He says, well, in questions of power then, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. That's how. Bind them down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. When I first heard this quote, I was like, chains, that kind of sounds like Marley, right, in the Christmas Carol. These chains binding him down. Why is that? Well, because men have the propensity to corrupt and be corrupted and to seek power at the expense of the good of others. So what do we need to do? We need the Constitution to say, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. You can do this, but only under these conditions. And no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. That's the idea. That's why you have a Constitution, to bind them down. Okay? Kind of an awesome quote, isn't it? So yeah, that's what it's there for. It's interesting, a quote that is attributed to Patrick Henry says this: the Constitution is not an instrument for government to restrain the people. It's an instrument for the people to restrain the government, lest it comes to dominate our lives and interests. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Our Constitution is to bind the government, not to bind us, because they're our servants, not our masters.